Good morning, everyone. My name is Newcomb. As you can see, it's spelled T-R-A-M, just to confuse you guys. It's actually pronounced like chum, like shark bait, or my friend chum. I've been in the field of ABA for over 11 years, and I'm at Continuum Autism Spectrum Alliance. We currently practice in the Virginia area, Maryland area. We're going to be in Virginia Beach, as well as Denver, Colorado Springs, and Chicago, and South Jersey, and South Florida. And San Diego. Yes, we are headed to San Diego. Sorry, Steve's going to... Oh, no, it's fine. I'm right there with you guys. Thank you. So basically, what we're going to review today is a brief history. I'm not going to lecture you about the entire history of ABA, but I do think it's important to understand where it came from to really put it in contrast of where it is today. We're also going to discuss the basic principles of ABA, misconceptions about ABA, and treatment strategies for modification and maintenance of behavior, and how ABA can help you. So first, let's talk about Pavlov. You guys, if you're familiar with him, most people know him as the person that rings a bell and makes a dog drool. He actually was not interested in psychology. His primary interest was physiology, the function of how our internal systems work. Through his studies through the reflex system and digestive glands, he discovered, while studying salivation in dogs, that he would ring a bell, present the food, the dog would start drooling because he was hungry. As he proceeded with his experiments, he discovered that before he even presented the food, at the sound of the bell, the dog would begin drooling. With this correlation, he termed classical conditioning, or conditional reflex. He put two and two together and said, oh, well, I had just trained this dog to salivate without the presentation of food. So that is actually a foundation of where ABA began. Edward Thorndike was an educational psychologist. He was primarily interested in how animals and people learn. He had what was called the puzzle box, and his primary animal of experiment he used was a cat. So here you can see the cat puzzle box, and what would happen was he would put the cat in the box with the bowl of food in the front, and he was looking to see how long it took an animal to learn to hit a lever or push a button in order to trigger the door mechanism to open. And he discovered that the learning process kind of occurred accidentally. If there was self-discovery involved, the subsequent trials afterwards, the time that it took for the cat to actually hit the button was decreased every single trial. And he actually developed the law of effect. And the law of effect states that anytime there's immediate consequence after a behavior, like a reward, and there's immediate satisfaction, that behavior is likely to occur again in the near future. We have John B. Watson. He's an interesting guy. He took a lot of Pavlov's idea of conditioned responses and how we present our stimulus or our environment. He was interested in child rearing and development. He actually was the first person to coin the term behaviorism, which was the starting foundation of the school of behaviorism. He had a very controversial experiment called Little Albert experiment. And what this was, he took an intellectually disabled child and presented him with a white rat in particular. And before the conditioning process, he wanted to see what the reaction was. The child had no response to the presentation of a white rat, but during the conditioning process, he was trying to condition the white rat to elicit a fear response or a scare or anxiety response. So every Another time during the experiment, he presented the white rat. He would stand behind the child, or his assistant would, and bang on a rod with pots and pans. And the child would start crying and screaming. So after multiple trials of this, he removed the stimuli of the banging of the pots on the rod, and every time he presented the white rat, the child would start crying immediately. He has now associated fear with this previously neutral stimuli. Now, not only did it just transfer to the white rat, but then he also presented white rabbits, white cats, and this response was generalized across the board to all small furry animals. So after white furry animals, he presented non-white furry animals. So we see and we learned through this experiment, even though it's extremely controversial and unethical, in all honesty, it was a very important experiment in seeing how responses are conditioned and transferred from one stimuli set to the next. Here is Burris Frederick Skinner, also known as B.F. Skinner. Now, he is basically the father of what started the applied behavior analysis and verbal behavior, taking it out of the experimental research environment into applying it in the homes and with clients and people. So he began a school called Radical Behaviorism, and it's really how we apply what we've studied or what the research has shown. So when we're talking about ABA, first and foremost, we have to learn what is behavior and how we define it. Behavior is an activity of living organisms. So it's not just what we do, it's what any living organism does. And it always has to be observable and measurable. So when we're talking about behaviors, we're not talking about what someone is not doing or what you're perceiving their feelings. We're actually talking physical movement that we can observe and measure and count the duration of time. And the way we like to define behavior is we're saying this person, instead of saying, oh, this person is happy, we're always going to say, oh, my daughter, my son is extremely happy. I'm going to look at you and say, well, why? What behaviors are we seeing that looks like happy? He's smiling, hugging, singing, all these kind of behaviors that are observable. And the best way that I found when we're talking about behaviors, how do you differentiate behavior, what is a behavior and what is not a behavior, is using this dead man's test. If a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior. So, if we're talking about, I don't want my child to hit, that's not a behavior. What is a behavior is having calm hands. That's what we're going to look to increase. So this is the definition of what applied behavior analysis is. It's a technical way of defining ABA. But what it actually states is that everything that is ABA-based and driven, procedures that we use in the home, is actually based off of principles, as you can see the previous experiments, in experimental setting, and then on top of that, based off of procedures used in the home that are evidence-based. And in order for it to be considered ABA or important to ABA, it has to be socially significant. We are looking to improve, increase, decrease behaviors that are applicable to society and to that individual. And then we always have to show that our procedures were responsible for that change in the behavior. And we do that through data collection. So here we're going to briefly discuss the 7 dimensions of ABA. Now, ABA is a broad umbrella, but these are the 7 components that are essential. And the first one is applied, where we just discussed the social significance of the behavior. The second one is behavior, and this is where we are targeting behaviors and we measure them through direct observation. So collecting data and graphing it. And analytic is the graphing part and the treatment part where we're looking at the occurrence or non-occurrence of behavior by manipulating variables in the environment. So how we're looking at antecedent, things that occur before the behavior and things that are occurring as a consequence after the behavior. And we're showing that these elements in our environment have a functional relationship to the behavior. Technological is actually a very interesting one because this is how we evolve in the field of ABA. All of our procedures used, every piece of curriculum or skill acquisition program or behavior intervention plan that we develop should be clearly defined and concise that I can send curriculum, to our office in Chicago, and they can use that same piece and garner the same kind of results and progress. And it has to be effective. So it must improve behavior to a practical degree. Where I'm not looking to teach a child just to line up items because it's something for them to do. I'm actually going to teach them to count while they're lining up items. It has to be practical. And conceptually systematic. So in order for our procedures to be relevant, they have to be based off of the basic principles of ABA. And we're looking at generality. Generality is when behavior change lasts over time and over people, occurs across multiple settings. And in order for us to ever say, as ABA therapists, to say that our program is successful, we have to be able to generalize these skill sets across all people, all settings, and for a duration of time. So let's talk about motivating operations. Why we do things. What is it in the environment that motivates us to engage in our behaviors? So here's a great example of motivating operations. What we often do is we contrive situations in order to motivate an individual to elicit a response. Mom texts her son, I'm leaving for the weekend. I hid $100 in your room for food. Clean your room and you will find it. So what are we contriving? We're contriving a situation where a child needs to clean his room in order to survive, basically. So we're finding that kind of what it is they're motivated by. So after we understand motivating operations, what is driving someone to engage in the behaviors they're engaged in, we want to look at reinforcement. There are multiple components of reinforcement, but the general idea of reinforcement is the consequence that follows after a behavior, and it increases the future frequency of that behavior. There are primary and secondary reinforcement. The primary reinforcement is the unconditional ones, or the ones you don't have to learn. When I'm thirsty, I drink water. When I'm cold, I need to get warm. Those are the primary. Secondary reinforcement is also known as conditioned reinforcement, things that have been learned. Oh, if I study hard, I get a good grade on a test. So there's ways that we can apply reinforcement. There's positive reinforcement, and this is where ABA gets a little confusing. We use the term positive and negative. Positive doesn't mean good in ABA. It actually means we're adding something as a consequence to increase the behavior. Whereas on the flip side, negative reinforcement isn't punishment. It's not punishing someone. It's actually we're removing an aversive stimuli as a consequence to increase the frequency of that behavior. And here's an important thing to remember, that not all rewards are reinforcers. We may think that just because we're giving social praise, that that's a reinforcer. Social praise is a conditioned response, meaning that we have to teach someone to actually value that as a consequence. If someone is thirsty and they say, I'm thirsty, you're not going to say, oh my goodness, here's lots of candy, or here's some money. You're actually going to, which is a reward, but you're actually going to reinforce them with what the most highly valued stimuli or item is, which is a glass of water.
Can you give us an example of positive?
Sure. So positive reinforcement. Let's say there's a behavior. Positive reinforcement. So I am in a grocery store with my son. All stores do this. You're going to check out, and there is a great wall of candy and toys. You know, Target does it, Giant does it, and my son starts throwing a tantrum because he wants some candy. So what I do is I give him candy. So what have I done there? I have positively reinforced the tantrum behavior. And how many times, as parents, have you done it or seen it? I'm definitely guilty of it. When I'm on the phone and my son is, interrupting a conversation, I'll say, okay, you can go play video games. What have I taught him? So that's positive reinforcement of inappropriate behaviors. Now on the flip side, negative reinforcement, where if my son is sitting in the car and I'm listening to music very loud and he's saying, Mom, it's too loud, I'm going to take away that aversive stimuli, something being too loud. Then that behavior of him appropriately asking me for things increases. Another example is food. If my child is eating dinner and he doesn't want to eat something, I'm going to say, okay, well, you can take one bite and then you don't have to eat the rest of it. So he takes one bite and then I remove the non-preferred food item. I'm actually increasing a tolerance or desensitizing him to that non-preferred food item. Do you have any other questions about what reinforcement is or what it looks like in that? So effective application of reinforcement. It's not just okay just to give consequences in reinforcement, but we have to understand how we create conditions where we can use reinforcement to elicit behavior. So the first condition is satiation. So here we're playing with the value of reinforcement. When someone satiates on something, it means they've had overexposure or continued access to that item. That continued access actually decreases the value. If you have ice cream, I love ice cream. I don't know if anybody else loves ice cream. But, I ate ice cream every single night while I was pregnant. Guess what? By the third month, because I really do love ice cream, it wasn't as valuable to me. So that continued access to ice cream over and over again actually decreases the value. And then the condition of deprivation, where we're actually limiting the access to the stimuli, increases the value. So if I don't have ice cream for a month, when I see a bowl of that peanut butter cup chocolate ice cream from Friendly's, I'm going to run right to it and eat it like there's no tomorrow because I haven't had it in over a month. And then also, as we learned through Thorndike, law of effect, contingency, there has to be contingency in no delay. So the contingency is the behavior has to occur to receive the reinforcement, and it has to be immediate. If you say, come here, and the child comes to you, and then you do something else, and the child is sitting or playing with a video game, you say, oh, nice job. The child is not going to understand what you're actually reinforcing. Is it me sitting here, me standing here, playing the video games? So it has to be immediate. So if you say, come here, and the child comes here, or comes to you, that immediate, oh my goodness, awesome job coming to me, or thanks for coming, bud, is going to be more powerful, and they're going to have that one-to-one correspondence. I did this, I get this. And then how we reinforce, the schedules of reinforcement. So, these are technical terms of explaining different ways to reinforce. There can be a fixed or variable interval. The fixed interval just says every 5 minutes, it's time-based. Every 5 minutes, I'm going to deliver reinforcement. And then a variable interval is going to be on average of 5 minutes. So it's a less predictable schedule. And then we have fixed and variable ratio, where the ratio is talking about every single response. So the fixed ratio says, every response or every behavior occurrence, I'm going to reinforce you. Whereas a variable ratio is, I'm not going to reinforce you for every time you do this, but every once in a while, on average of every 5 responses. And then the level of reinforcement is really important. So it's called differential reinforcement, and it's just a way of saying how we reinforce and to what extent. So harder skills that are harder to learn, I'm going to give the highest praise or the highest level of reinforcement. Whereas skills, I'm not, the child already knows. I'm not going to give him a giant piece of cookie. I'm actually going to give him a little piece of cookie for showing me that he can present those skills. And also, I'm not going to reinforce for incorrect responses. I'm going to reinforce for the best response or the correct responses. So we can use this to shape behavior. So, when we're talking about approximations or building a skill set, we can use differential reinforcement where a brand new skill like sitting on a potty or saying hi or social interactions, the first time you can prompt the child to the response, you give them a lot of reinforcement so they learn, oh, that's kind of cool. Every time I do this, I get a great cookie or I get, an M&M. So we talked about adding reinforcement or adding something as a consequence. Punishment is actually a consequence that follows behavior that decreases the future frequency of that behavior. So when we talk about punishment, we're actually talking about decreasing behavior. Positive punishment is adding a stimulus or something aversive that will decrease a behavior. And negative punishment is actually removing a preferred stimulus to decrease the behavior. So this is a little chart of how we can look at consequences in terms of behavior. Anytime we are adding something with reinforcement or negative or removing something, providing a negative reinforcement, we're looking to increase that behavior. And anytime we are looking to decrease behavior, we're looking at punishment procedures. So in order to understand behavior and how to treat it, we have to understand the function of behavior. How many times have you said, I don't know why it happens, it just happens? Or out of the blue, my child just starts, engaging in stereotypy, or I can't tell, all of a sudden, they'll be crying or throwing a tantrum. Nothing ever happens without a reason. All behavior serves a function. Anytime someone is engaging in a behavior, there's always a reason as to why that behavior is occurring. So when we're looking at functions of behavior, we're looking at conditions, environments in which behavior occurs. So where does the behavior occur? Does it occur in alone settings, or when you're placing a demand, or they're looking for your attention? Or are they just playing and it happens? And once we understand the conditions, we can actually kind of pinpoint the functions of behavior, why it's occurring. Automatic or sensory could be an internal or intrinsic reinforcement because it feels good to them. Or escape. They're trying to not engage in a demand that you just placed on them. If I say, go do your homework, and my son runs to his room, that's an escape behavior. He clearly does not want to do his homework because that behavior occurred after the demand I just placed. Is it because they want attention? Attention can come with a physical attention, tickles, hugs. Eye contact is actually a form of attention, and social praise or any kind of verbal interaction. The thing to understand about attention is that even reprimanding a child for behavior is still feeding and positively reinforcing behavior because it is attention. And access to tangible is, do they want food, candy, toys? Is that why they're engaging in the behavior? So this is just kind of a little chart that I made to help break down conditions and the functions that occur in these conditions. And once you understand that, it helps you understand the reinforcing value of each function. So if someone is trying to escape a demand, that is being negatively reinforced because you're removing the undesired demand, activity, or interaction. Social interactions can be very aversive to individuals when they have difficulty processing communication and conversation. So, and understanding why it's occurring. I feel as a parent, when you understand why, it makes so much more sense as to how we can help our children. So when someone is trying to escape a demand, is the demand too easy and they're bored? Is it too hard? Can they not process it? Is it anxiety producing? These are all reasons why we escape demands. When we're looking at alone or play conditions, it can be, the function can be attention, where we're providing positively reinforcing interactions. They want attention, and it can be positive or negative attention, like I said. It doesn't always, any attention is going to be positive reinforcement, even though it may be a reprimand. And play conditions, often the function is access to tangibles. Now this is just kind of a basic guideline. It doesn't mean that this occurs in every single one of these conditions, but this is just kind of foundational to help start the understanding process. And when something is sensory or automatic, you know, as a therapist, I'm always looking for, is that child getting enough sensory input? I want to be giving them so much, the right, correct level of sensory input where they don't need to engage in stereotypy, or they don't need to engage in these kind of automatically reinforcing behaviors. So I've mentioned the term antecedent and consequence, but to break it down, this is what's known as a three-term contingency. An antecedent is anything that is happening directly before the behavior occurs. So things that are said, what is going on in the environment, noises, light, level, everything. So right now, this entire room is an antecedent to your behavior. It could be too cold, and you may be pulling your jacket close. The lights may be too dim, and you're getting a little drowsy. My voice may be too droning for you, and you may be falling asleep. But you know, when we're talking about antecedents, we're looking at the entire environment. It's not just your interaction with an individual, but it could be anything in the environment. And then the behavior is what the individual is doing. So what it looks like, how many times occurring, how long, or what he or she is saying. And the consequence is what occurs immediately. So it's not always what you're doing, but it could be happening in a classroom, and then children stop and look at a child when they're throwing a tantrum or aggressing. So it can be anyone in the environment that's providing some kind of attention or reinforcement as a consequence. So other terminology of ABA. You know, when you start hearing about extinction, we're actually taking a behavior that has been previously reinforced. So like I said before, the scenario of my child throwing a tantrum for a candy bar at the store, I'm gonna put that behavior on extinction, meaning I'm no longer going to be providing that candy bar. And when you do that, there is an extinction burst. So before the behavior can decrease, the behavior is going to increase. And not just the behavior, but other behaviors are going to increase. So the topography of the behavior is going to change. What it looks like is going to change. And the reason is, you know, all I had to do before was scream and cry. I would get a candy bar. I'm not getting the candy bar anymore. I must not be doing it right, or I must not be doing it loud enough. I'm going to scream louder. Okay, that doesn't work. I'm going to kick now. No, that didn't work. I'm going to start hitting myself. I'm going to keep escalating my behavior until I get that consequence that I usually typically get. So this is a part that's actually really hard for parents and for therapists, this extinction burst period. It shouldn't last more than, a few days. So you just have to be really patient, just kind of stay firm and stick with it. So before any behavior can decrease, it's going to get a lot worse. It's going to look worse for a short period of time before it can decrease. And then we've talked about shaping behavior. So we're just reinforcing little steps or approximations or pieces of that behavior until the entire behavior is there. So when we're talking about shaping, teaching a child how to do a jumping jack, there's a lot of components involved when you're trying to teach a child. There's jumping, moving the legs, moving the hands. So if it's someone with low muscle tone, that may be very difficult, and motor planning issues, that may be really difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually teach one component of that behavior at a time and kind of build on those pieces. So first I may teach that child to jump. And then after that jump, or to spread their legs out afterwards, after that jumping is shown. And then after that, I'm going to teach them how to do the hands and build it all together as the final response. And again, I can't say this enough, but how important generalization is. Any good ABA therapist, or any therapist in general, doesn't have to be ABA. A successful therapist will always be targeting for generalization. OT, speech, anybody. If the child cannot perform the actions that your therapist is working on in multiple settings, it is not a successful therapy. Okay, so I'm not sure how much you all know about ABA. Some people are well versed in ABA. Some people actually don't understand what it is, or they think they know what it is, but they may be completely wrong. A lot of families don't look for ABA or applied behavior services because they think it's too rigid or too confining. So here I just want to talk a little bit about those kind of misconceptions. Because ABA, if you think about behavior, applies to every single individual and animal, living organism on this planet. We all engage in behaviors. So we could all benefit with the base knowledge of what ABA is. So here, ABA is an experimental treatment and not scientifically demonstrated to be effective. That is completely untrue. The brief history that we went through, yes, it started in an experimental setting, but through time, it has evolved to be applicable into today's society, in the home, in the community, in the school, and it is evidence-based. And here's one that I love, is ABA does not teach a learner how or why to do something. It only trains them to behave in a certain way. Well, you know what? It's kind of true. When we engage in a behavior, it's all been trained one way or another through a series of environmental antecedents or consequences. So yes, in some ways it is true. But in order for us to understand why or how, that is an internal thought process. That is something that any good therapist in ABA should be teaching your child. When you're teaching a child to ask for water, you're not just going to teach the child to ask for water in any condition, but they have to be thirsty. And when, they're looking for that water or that refreshment, you're going to say, oh, you need water because you're thirsty. You're actually pairing that thought process with the stimulus so they learn why they need it. And ABA is just animal training adapted for use with people. And the reason why this exists is because in an experimental setting, all the experiments primarily were based with animals to study animal behavior. So yes, ABA can be used for animals, but it is very applicable to humans. And I hear this all the time, even with instructors coming in when I'm training them. Oh, am I just bribing the child? Well, what is the operational definition of bribing? How do we define bribing? Bribing is actually presenting a misconception to get results from an individual to your own advantage. That is not what reinforcement is. I'm not bribing this child to do something for me. Even though it may feel like bribing because you are delivering so much reinforcement, what we're actually doing is that we're rewarding a behavior. This child did something. They deserve a reward. You go to work. Your boss is not bribing you to work. They're actually giving you a paycheck for your hard work. So anytime we're talking about reinforcement, we're not talking about bribing. We're actually talking about how we are rewarding someone for their hard work. Things that we may take for granted that we learn innately in our development, it's really hard for others. And with that hard work, they deserve some sort of reward. And ABA is specialized in autism therapy, and it's not used for people with other diagnoses. So like I talked about, behavior is general across the board. We all engage in behavior. Now I understand the majority of my clients at Continuum, I would say about 80%, is on the autism spectrum or presents profiles related to the autism spectrum. But there is a 20% that we've been very successful with, that we've helped, kids learn how to read, learn how to write, learn how to improve their fine motor skills or gross motor skills. It's useful across the board for any population and profile. And then I hear this a lot. Well, I don't want my child to be a robot. I don't want them to like Pavlov's experiment of you ring a bell, the dog salivates. I don't want my child to be like that. Well, who does? We're not training people to be robots, but any kind of ABA should be teaching child skill sets that can be generalized to other settings. And then ABA addresses behavior only. Yes, we do address behavior, but guess what? A lot of people say, well, I want to focus on speech with language. Well, speech is a behavior. Speech is a learned response. ABA can benefit all practices across the board. And then ABA doesn't work with older kids. A lot of families come to me and say, oh, I think I missed the mark on ABA. My child is 9 years old, or my child is 15, 19, or I have an adult child living at home who's 29. It's too late for ABA, and that is not true. Studies have shown, and Thorndike particularly did a lot of studies on learning and how age affects learning. Well, it's not that adults aren't able to learn. It just takes a little bit more time. That's what those studies show. So the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is absolutely false. Anytime there is a behavior you want to modify, increase, or decrease, we can use ABA to do that. And ABA is all table work. So I would say, being in the field for over 11 years, when I first started, yes, we were at the table a lot. We did mass trials. It was very boring for the individual, and the learning and the acquisition was robotic because you rely on their rote memory. When you say, oh, what's your name? I'm going to say Nicholas, then that's a rote response. But the way ABA has evolved, that we're actually moving it away from the table. Table learning is very good for individuals that easily get distracted by other variables in the environment. So in an isolated setting or a controlled setting at the table, you will have the entire focus of that individual. So yes, a lot of times we do start the skill at the table, but we're always looking to generalize the skill as quickly as possible. ABA uses aversive and physical punishment. Again, I refer back to Thorndike because he did a lot of studies with the internal motivation piece and component of ABA. So ABA does sometimes use, aversive and physical punishment in worst case scenarios or in scenarios where reinforcement is not producing best results. And punishment isn't always severe punishment. It could just be like you get a timeout. That is a punishment procedure. You're actually negatively punishing a child. If they throw a toy during a play date, okay, you're going to go to timeout. You're removing that enriched environment from them. So that's actually a punishment procedure. It's not always going to be the severe holds, restraints, or when I started, blindfolds, sprays. That's kind of old school ABA, and we've luckily moved away from that. And I feel really fortunate to be part of that evolution. And then ABA takes childhood away from the child. ABA actually gives the child skill sets to engage in their environment, to want to participate in their environment, and do things that children do. A lot of times our kids don't know how to play on a playground. They don't know how to socially interact with peers on the playground, or they'll just stand there, or they'll just push a swing over and over again because they don't know what their environment means and how to process it because there's so much going on. And what ABA does is we're actually teaching them foundational skill sets to recognize things in the environment and how to respond to it. And discourages socialization by keeping learners at home. Well, if your child can't socialize, staying at home or being out in the community, you're not going to be promoting socialization either ways. So sometimes, yes, a lot of our ABA therapy and sessions start in the home. And it starts in the home because of that controlled setting. We have to teach them the foundational skill set first in the home before we can generalize it out to the community. But also, the way we do ABA, and particularly at Continuum, is that we're also integrating play dates. Any good ABA practice, you should be targeting all these skill sets across the board in multiple settings. So trips out to the community, having your child shop with you. That's a big deal. So a lot of our sessions are community trips to Target or the grocery store or to the doctor's office. We do all of that, and we can target all those behaviors. And then skills only work at the table with a therapist. Again, we have to generalize, and that is a key component. Anytime you're looking for any kind of ABA company, or you're currently engaged with, ABA therapists, you always want to be looking for that end goal of how are we generalizing and maintaining this skill. Okay, so this is what a comprehensive treatment should entail. And again, every child is different, every individual is different. So you always want to be looking for pieces that should be tailored. I'm never going to go to a client and say, oh, I've done this program before, here you go. Here's your program. We're going to do the same exact thing. Because everybody is different. Some skill sets are higher developed. They may be able to count numbers, do math, but they're not able to recognize letters of the alphabet. So one of the components is verbal behavior, and it's why we bother to communicate. When we look at, it's not just speaking, it's not just sign language, it can be pecks, tantrums. Even though it's a inappropriate or problematic behavior, is a form of communication. When someone is throwing a tantrum, they're actually trying to tell you something. What is it that they're trying to communicate? So when we look at verbal behavior, we're actually looking at verbal operants. There's a lot of verbal operants out there. I believe there's about 22 verbal operants, but the foundational verbal operants are demanding. So when we place a demand, we're asking for something. It can be pointing, it can be gesturing, it can be looking at someone, but we're always asking for something. So that is one of the primary ways and the first steps that we learn to communicate as babies, developmentally. And then tacting. So once we learn to ask for things that we need, we learn what they're called. A bottle of milk, a child may see it and they want it, and typically what you say is, oh, you want the milk? Here you go. We're actually tacting the item for them. We're labeling them. So that's how kids naturally pick up on these cues that we're providing. Language is not just something that happens. There's actually developmental steps and milestones that occur with language. and echoics. So that is actually just repeating sounds or repeating words that you hear. A lot of times I have family members that say, my child said, or my pediatrician said my child's never going to speak. And the first question I always ask is, are they making any sounds? Are they copying any sounds? If they can make any kind of sounds, emit any kind of vocalization, then I say, you know what? Let's work on it. Let's see what happens. If they can make sounds, then there is nothing physiologically wrong with their ability to emit sounds, but maybe it's just a behavior that we have to shape and show that there's a functional relationship. So if every time someone goes, what could it be? I'm gonna say, is it an iPad? Are you asking for an iPad? Or if there's sounds, then let's change it to say E, I, O. Let's have them repeat different sounds that we're saying. And intraverbals. Intraverbal is, filling in the blanks. We're not really looking at anything to elicit the intraverbal response. When you're singing a song on a radio, and it cuts out, but you keep singing it, that's an intraverbal. You're actually pulling from your memory and filling in the blanks. Or social questions. You say, hi, what's your name? And then you have to answer me. That's also considered intraverbal. It's how we verbally communicate with verbal cues back and forth. And last one of the foundational verbal operants is receptive. Receptive, if you think of it in terms of receiving a direction. It's a listen and learn response. We're looking at how someone hears something and then processes it and does the response. So if you say, go clean your room, can someone hear that, go to their room and clean it? So based off of understanding verbal behavior, there's different modes of discrete trial teaching or discrete trial instruction. We're looking at teaching small, like a skill set, but teaching it one target at a time, individually. And when we're teaching that skill set, we're looking at behavior momentum. Behavior momentum is part of verbal behavior. It's a new component where we're now understanding that in order to teach someone a really hard skill, it's much easier for them to get it right with a lot of easy questions or easy demands preceding it. Because they're actually rolling with the momentum of, I got it right, and then you give them the hard one. And then we look at stimulus demand fading. So after they deliver that really hard skill that you're trying to teach them, we're not going to ask them another hard one and then another hard one. We're actually going to remove the high, hard demands and give them a couple easy ones again to give them a break. It's so much easier to give you responses if, not all of them are hard. If every single thing is hard, it actually becomes aversive, and you're not going to want to, participate in that behavior anymore. And then we mix and vary. So like I said, we did a lot of mass trials where we were delivering the same SD over and over again. I remember, you'd sit there and say, touch your nose. They'd touch their nose. Awesome, you touched your nose. This is part of body ID. Can you identify your body parts given a direction? So in mass trial format, you run 10 trials. By the 10th trial, my client was going, I'd say, touch your nose, and they're like, oh, God. And I'm like, bud, don't worry, we both feel the same way. It's not fun for the learner. It's not fun for the instructor, which is why we shouldn't be doing it anymore. There are still ABA companies out there that do mass trials. I actually get a lot of instructors coming to us that are still doing mass trials. It's not an effective way to teach anybody. I understand practice makes perfect, but there's such thing as too much practice or boring practice, repetitive practice. We're not teaching them to use it and integrate it. But what mixing and varying does is that we're actually teaching them multiple targets all at the same time. We're building neurological synapses to help them be able to switch from one thought process to another, to another, to another. And that's why we mix and vary. And a lot of times, our families want to work on tying shoes, washing their hands, for the older kids, making coffee, cooking breakfast. Those are really complex behaviors. Discrete trial, where we're breaking it down as one demand at a time, that's not going to work for those types of behaviors. What we do is we have a task analysis, where we're breaking down the behavior chains, like hand washing, to every single minute detailed step, so we can actually teach that in a sequence, so they learn that behavior all at once. And we do address a lot of problematic behaviors. Too fast, sorry. So with problematic behaviors, we always want to be addressing it with a behavior intervention plan, so everyone is consistent across the board. It's not good enough if I'm just implementing a behavior plan, but if my husband's not doing it, guess what? The child's not going to learn to increase any kind of behaviors I want to increase. If my son throws a tantrum and I ignore it, but then my child throws a tantrum in front of him, he goes, "Oh, bud, what's wrong? What can I help you with? What do you need?" He's going to keep throwing tantrums. He hasn't learned that this tantrum behavior is not going to be effective. And then, again, the reinforcement schedule for tasks and behaviors. When we talk about reinforcement, we always want to be looking at how often we're reinforcing. Is it enough? Is it not enough? Is there too much time in between reinforcement? How do we keep our learner motivated and wanting to learn? And again, like I said, generalization is always going to be a very key component in any kind of teaching or learning environment. And here, after we have generalized the skill across the board, we're going to put it in maintenance, meaning that we are actually going to fade our reinforcement. We're going to fade how often we run it during session to make sure that the skill can be maintained on a daily basis, then every other day, then weekly, without us having to teach it. And this is where we fade our reinforcement. Because the child is not getting reinforced as frequently, we're fading it, and they're actually learning the behavior. So they're no longer becoming dependent on the reward system in place. And this is one of my favorite ways to teach, is natural environment teaching, where we're actually on the floor playing with the kids. It's very naturally occurring. It actually is immediate generalization of the skill set. Playing on a playground, playing on the floor, teaching them shapes, colors, with trains. That's all part of the natural environment teaching. And a lot of people don't associate social skills training with ABA. But it is a behavior. It is something that we can teach just through the basic principles of reinforcement. And I always say that caregiver training is probably one of the most important components in terms of I can come into your home and work with your child 3 hours a day. But guess what? There's still 21 hours left in that day. So the majority of the time spent is not in an ABA session. So without the help of the family members and the caregivers, everyone practicing the same procedures, the child's not going to learn, and it's not going to be effective. So a lot of times there may be frustration with families or with individuals that progress is not enough. Well, let's look at how we're teaching the child across the board all day long. And so how do we teach the behaviors? I always like to start and build on success. So if I know a child loves numbers or loves colors, I'm going to actually start with a lot of their preferences and build on that. If I'm trying to teach them how to identify objects, I'm going to teach them their preferred toys and teach them how to identify those toys first. We're building kind of this foundational groundwork to build up skill sets. And before you ever place a demand or the learning target upon an individual, you have to make sure they're paying attention. So we're looking for, eye contact. Are they ready to learn? Are they listening? Those types of things. Those are the behaviors you want to see before you even start teaching. Using simple and direct language. So, how often have you given a direction and, your child doesn't do it? And so you keep placing the direction and you say it in different ways to see if they can respond. That's actually almost a sensory overload. You're giving way too much stuff to process. If you say, sit down, all right, no, come here, you have to sit down, or go sit on this table, put your bottom on the chair. How many words have you just thrown at the child? That's over 20 words right there alone. So think of it in terms of processing. When you're using so much language, it's really, really hard to understand what are the key words I should be hearing. So the best way to deliver is directly and just saying, sit down, and then showing them what it means when you say sit down. That's 2 words that can elicit the same response as the 20 words that you just used. And there are a lot of visual strategies. So we're looking at, activity schedules, visual prompts, ways to learn things visually. Activity schedules are great because it gives the learner a way to understand what's happening in their environment. A lot of times, a child won't engage in behavior or won't want to learn because they're thinking, how much longer? How long is this going to go for? But if they know, like, oh, okay, I'm going to sit at the table, learn a couple things, then after that we're going to go play with blocks, great. That I know what to expect. It's almost anxiety-producing if you don't know what's going to happen. Especially if you're starting a new program, if someone is used to a routine and they have difficulty processing change or adapting to change, when you change their routine, you're actually almost like putting a blindfold over their eyes. They no longer have an understanding of the environment and what's going to occur. There's going to be a lot of anxiety and stress happening. And then we want to look at errorless learning. Our philosophy is that before you even learn an error, we want to teach you the right way to do it. So we're not going to wait for errors to occur. Once an error occurs, it's almost more difficult to teach the correct response. And the longer it occurs, if it's a behavior and they've continually erred over and over again, well, guess what? The likelihood of them getting it right the next time drops significantly. And then we want to look at our prompt strategies. So how we're prompting to teach the response. There's multiple ways of doing this. You can do, I believe, so with the prompt strategies, we can prompt them physically, we can prompt them verbally, we can use gestures, we can actually model, this is sitting, and we show them what sitting looks like. But the one thing you have to remember about prompting is that you don't want to use too many prompt strategies. You kind of want to pick one that's kind of tailored and best for your learner and stick with it. Because when you start using multiple prompts, it gets very confusing. And then errors will occur. We err all the time. It's how we error correct. So our error correction format is that once the error does occur, we're going to model the correct response. We're going to show them what it looks like. And then after we model it, we're going to represent the SD so that they can actually present that skill with the SD. It's almost kind of like trying to clean the slate and then showing them how to respond correctly afterwards. And then, so ABA, you have to be adaptable. It's, even though we have curriculum, we have a format that we like to teach, we have a way where we error correct, but things happen. Learners are unpredictable. We always have to be flexible and adaptable to the environment and change our teaching strategies to best work with our learners. And I love using creative problem solving in any kind of my sessions. Sometimes if a child is jumping a lot and I'm not understanding why, I'm going to look at the other components and then I'm going to change my teaching strategy. Okay, well, we were going to work at a table, but I think we need to be moving a lot more. So I'm going to run more programs where we can be running and chasing each other and playing. And I want to engage our learners through play and interest. So this is kind of a basic way of how we motivate our learners. Through play, through their interests, and if we can embed our teaching targets in their hobbies, in their preferred activities, that's even better because they're going to retain it and learn it quicker. And then we teach our individuals how to interact with the environment. So if your child is not interacting with their environment, they're not going to be able to learn in their environment. So teaching them how to behave in a line or how to approach someone to ask them to play. It's not that kids don't want to play. They just don't know how to do it. So that's what we're looking to do. And then we use naturally occurring SDs to promote generalization. So an SD is a demand that you place to elicit the response that you want. So if you want a child to stand up, you're going to say stand up, and they learn that once they stand up, there's going to be a consequence, or you're going to say good job. So we use naturally occurring SDs, so we're looking for ways to say it naturally so it's not so contrived. And most importantly, for everyone in the room, is that we always have to follow through with our demands. When you present a demand, regardless of the behaviors that are occurring, you want some kind of consistency and follow through. You know, even if you say, walk to the table, and the child does not walk, if you don't follow through, they have just learned the behavior is, I don't need to walk to the table when you tell me to do it. And guess what? That's going to generalize to other demands. So we always want follow through. And then we're looking at how we reinforce. You know, we have token economies. So that's actually, you know, where we're delivering tokens for them to earn their rewards. And then we look at reinforcement schedules, how often, and the differential reinforcement procedures. So remember, the most rewarding or most reinforcing highest value is saved for the most difficult or best responses. So even if you're teaching something and something becomes independent, where they're just spontaneously responding, I'm going to give them a huge, like, you know, if they're earning one M&M for a response, and all of a sudden they say it independently without any prompting from me, I'm going to give them like 3 or 4 M&Ms, because that was amazing. So I'm going to want to keep differing how I reinforce. And we're looking at, so these are different types of schedules. We're looking, anytime we want to decrease a behavior, we're always looking to increase a behavior as a replacement behavior. So as ABA therapists, we use different types of differential reinforcement procedures. So DRA, DRO, we're looking to reinforce alternative behaviors or other behaviors that are occurring outside of the targeted behaviors. And then DRL, we're looking to actually reinforce when the rates of the behavior occur low. And we find this out by taking baseline data. So before we implement any of our procedures, we're always going to take a baseline to see how often the behavior is occurring without any kind of intervention. And then a DRI is teaching someone incompatible behavior. So if a child gets up from his chair often in a classroom, we're going to actually reinforce every time he's sitting in the chair, because that's an incompatible behavior. You can't stand up and sit at the same time. And then a punishment procedure that you can do is response cost. So when you deliver a reinforcement, if a behavior does occur, you can remove it. That's what's called a response cost. We have to keep the value of PERD stimuli high. So we use deprivation satiation to create, to change the value of the reinforcement. So in order to keep it high, we're going to use deprivation and not give them access to that item. And then going along with the different conditions of reinforcement, we're looking at how we vary it, because one item is not going to hold the same value over a period of time. So we have to keep it varied. We actually have to know, have basically a basic list of what items, preferred items there are that we can kind of switch in and out and present to them as reinforcement. And we're always looking to shape and reinforce the best responses. Now, a lot of my session, we incidentally reinforce behaviors. You know, eye contact, social interaction. Even though it's not a targeted plan in a curriculum, anytime appropriate behaviors or skills that you want to increase occur, we're incidentally reinforcing them. We're going to give them token, we're going to give them praise, we're going to give them an edible. That's what we want to do. And these are kind of like the things that we need to be doing to kind of create a cohesive treatment plan for our individuals. So when we're looking at ABA and what it can do for you, we can address and treat behavior concerns, and we do it systematically. meaning that we're not going to just kind of throw things around and see what works, but there's actual a plan and a method, how we treat the behavior, how we incrementally increase certain behaviors and decrease other behaviors. And we're going to teach new skills and improve areas of learning deficits. And let's see, and then we do that by doing assessments. You know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with assessments, but that's how we tailor our treatments. And then in order to do it, it always has to be clear and concise treatment. Every treatment that's implemented, you have to know why. Why are we doing this treatment? What is it addressing?
You said you do some assessments. Do you do like standard type assessments that are done across all the psychology type?
Well, typically in ABA, what we do is we do, you know, a VB map, which is like a verbal behavior milestone achievement protocol. So we're actually, you know, there's different types of assessments that we can be doing. You know, psychological testing and all those kind of assessments are done with psychologists.
Okay, but like the learning deficits, like that kind of stuff, you don't really concentrate on that. You're more looking for behavior deficits rather than.
It's all learning is behavior. So when we're doing our assessments are actually targeting, you know, expressive language, receptive language, how we communicate, how we learn, you know, and basically when we do our assessment, we're actually looking at skills. Do they have these base skills? If they don't, then we need to teach them. If they do, then what's the next skill set that we can do and teach them? And all the assessments are based on developmental milestones. So at this age, a typically developing child should be able to say, you know, hi, talk in 3 to 5 word sentences by the age of, you know, 3, 4. So that's kind of basically what the assessments are based off of that we're doing. We also do like daily living skills and seeing, you know, can they tie their shoe? Can they brush their teeth? Those are the type of assessments that we do.
Okay, I'm trying to think of how this applies more towards, like you're saying, towards like adults with needs.
Yeah. So adults with needs, it's on the developmental scale. So where are they developmentally? If they could benefit from learning skill sets that are appropriate for language development for a 3-year-old, then, you know, we do tailor our curriculum for that. We're never just going to choose an age and be like, okay, well, they're this age, we're going to do this curriculum. We're actually looking at their developmental milestones. What milestones have they achieved? What do you want to achieve? And we do our assessments based off of that. So that's how we tailor our curriculum to individuals. Yes?
So you would do young adults and life skills with verbal.
Pardon?
You know, verbal abilities
Mm-hmm.
young adults.
Yes. 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 We definitely work on verbal skills and language development for young adults even. Yeah, across the board. Skills can be learned at any point in time. There's not like a cap of age that, oh, well, if your individual does not learn this at this time, they can never learn it. That's not true. What is true, though, is that you may want to, as your child or an individual gets older, your priorities change. It may not be as important to teach them how to say something or say things or ask someone to play when they're 23 years old, but you may want to just switch your priorities to, you know, daily living skills, teaching them how to take care of themselves at that point. So it's not that we don't teach these skill sets, it's that we're always reprioritizing as an individual grows. So all treatment plans need to be evidence-based. So don't ever worry, you know, if you're ever questioning a treatment plan, just ask for the research. Say, what do you have? What can you show me that say this is an effective method to use with my child or individual? And the number one thing with ABA, there has to be data. All of our treatment plans are data-driven. We don't know if our programs are working or if they're moving in the right direction without the data. We are constantly taking data and analyzing and looking for that trend in the data to say, yes, they have that skill. And then, you know, we don't want to build splinter skills. meaning like, they have some advanced skills, but they don't have that necessary foundation. A parent can say, oh, my child, will wave bye, but, they won't do these other things in a social context. Well, just because they can wave bye doesn't mean that, they can imitate bye. You want to teach them imitation skills first. Imitation skills is a necessary, it's how we learn. We learn by imitating our peers, our siblings, our parents. So imitation skill is something that even though, why do I have to teach a child how to wave bye and imitate you if they're doing it at the door? Well, that's a completely different skill set. And we want to make sure we have a solid foundation. So like through your questions, we've talked about different areas of concern, daily living skills, social skills, academic skills, pre-academic skills, prom behavior. This can all be treated through ABA. And then when you teach a skill, we teach you the skill set to address the area of concern. So it's not just us providing services, but we're actually teaching you how to do it. Our ultimate goal is to not be in your home at the end of the day. Our ultimate goal is for you to have these tools that you can use it and help your child succeed. So these are the assessments that I was talking about. A functional behavior assessment, the ABLES are, which is an assessment of basic language and learning skills, revised, the BB map, and then functional living skills, and then preference assessments. These are all the different types of tools that we use to figure out where your individual is developmentally and what areas we need to address. And again, data and graphs are extremely important. They inform us of what to do next. Is this skill mastered? Can we move on to the next skill set? And it's evidence that our treatment plan is working. So a lot of times when you're going to therapy, you don't know, you're basically kind of saying, oh, I think it's working, but I'm not sure. I can kind of see a change in my child. Well, with ABA, there shouldn't be any guesswork. It's written out. It's right there in the graphs. And it's always important to have program integrity. We always take data and then we do an inter-observer agreement or reliability. Just because one therapist takes data does not mean that they're doing it correctly. In order to ensure program integrity, that we are all doing it correctly across the board, we're going to bring in another person, another therapist on the team or the supervisor to also collect the same data or on the same session to make sure we're seeing the same thing across the board. Is that response correct? Did I get it correct? Did they get it correct? We're all in agreement. And again, everyone is very unique. Everyone presents a different profile that needs to be addressed, and we all want to tailor it to address your individual concerns. And the most important thing that I can't stress enough to families or anyone looking into ABA is that not all BCBAs are created equally. Just because someone is certified and has a BCBA does not mean they're qualified to work with your child in the home. It could mean that you can be a social worker, you can be a psychologist and still get a BCBA, but have never worked in the home with a child before. So always be looking for references. Look at their CV, see what kind of experiences they have. Do they have experiences that actually kind of meet what you need? If you have an early learner, do they have experience working with early learners? Not all consultants do. Some people have worked in a very clinical hospital setting. So they may not necessarily be the best fit to provide in-home therapy. And then I've listed the website for the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. It helps you find therapists and consultants in your area. So that's just kind of I know it's a lot of information and it was really dense, but that's the basic of what ABA is.
How long would a typical session, first session, how many weeks or how many years?
I wish I had a general response and be like, oh, every session is going to be 2 hours, 5 days a week.
Well, how many weeks or months or, is it just one day or?
No, for ABA to be effective, it has to be, Studies show the most effective ABA has to be 25 hours a week over a long period of time, 1 to 2 years. So it is a commitment. But again, if you're looking at ABA, we're looking at building skill sets. So it has to be consistently done. And for every individual that varies, financial situations, the needs of the individual. So basically, not everybody is going to have the same amount of ABA.
I would say my daughter does. I think in preschool and middle, probably 10 hours a week.
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends. Exactly, is the preschool providing ABA? Is the school setting providing ABA? It all varies.
Does insurance cover?
Yeah, it varies by states. It does. Unfortunately, there isn't a format with insurance companies. It should be covered. If you want, in my opinion, everyone could benefit from ABA, but it really actually varies depending on your insurance and what state you're in. So, we're moving towards working with insurance companies to have it covered. A lot of insurance companies are now recognizing the need for ABA and that it is an actual therapy and science. The board has helped us a lot by providing standards for the supervisors, but now they're also providing standards for the therapists, the in-home therapists. So I'm hoping that with these changes, the insurance companies will be more apt to cover ABA. And that's something that you can always ask your insurance provider.
What about government programs like Social Security and Medicaid?
So with Medicaid, I know.
Are you getting any type of therapy with TPT?
No.
I just know California.
I do know that in the state of Virginia, Medicaid does provide ABA services. Now the question is, it's like you have to use certain services through Medicaid. Military TRICARE covers ABA. It's phenomenal. So it really depends on the insurance, and it does vary state by state. So it is worth asking your provider.
I think also through early intervention for through younger kids, early intervention includes ABA if you need to.
Yeah, so
That's free.
right. And then some counties actually have early intervention programs within their counties too, so that's worth looking into your individual county and see what resources they provide.
And I just also want to say for those who have multiple kids, my daughter does ABA and they incorporate my other 2 children in so that she's learning social skills about what it entails to be a sibling.
Yeah, so siblings are usually your first peers that you learn how to interact with, and that's great. I love hearing that.
My granddaughter has been doing ABA. She's 3 now. She's been doing it since she was diagnosed at a year, and she's now got a younger sister that's a year old, and Riley's being trained in ABA just simply for consistency.
Right.
So that it makes it easier, but the strides that Elicit has made with this program, she gets 18 hours a week, and she is speaking at a 7.5-year-old level. She understands language at a 5.5-year-old level.
Right.
It is amazing, and change in her behavior as a result of this therapy and our ability to relate to her and to shape her behavior.
Right. And that
has been amazing.
And the point you brought up about her ability to communicate and use language and the change in the behavior, those 2 things are intrinsically linked. If you look at problematic behaviors as a form of communication and you start teaching someone how to communicate with words or with pictures or with sign language, and they see that that's actually working better and they need to use less effort than throwing a tantrum or hitting, then you're going to see that change in behavior. Because a lot of frustration can happen when you can't communicate your needs.
How do you evaluate treatment plans and progress analysis?
So as a parent, how do you evaluate it? So what we're looking for as a parent is, if you're looking for that data, and then you're looking for, quarterly or biannually assessments to see the actual progress. It's not good enough to just say, oh, I think this is working. I think this is, this therapist is good. But they should actually providing you with some kind of data and assessment that says, yes, your child has met this criteria, and they're continuing to improve. And you should also be involved in that assessment process. You know, it's not good enough. A lot of times someone will just hand you a piece of paper with the assessment, and you're not going to know what it means. You're not familiar with that assessment. What we should be doing is actually including the parents during that assessment process, showing you what area it is that we're assessing, what these individual, you know, columns that we're filling in looks like, and what it means. So, you know, to be an active participant, no one's going to say, oh, come do this. I mean, not many people do. We do. We actually, I love parent involvement, but, you know, if you feel kind of out of the loop or kind of removed and isolated from your child's therapy, you need to be involved because you need to be aware of what's going on, what these things mean.
How do you decide how much ABA versus OT? If you said 25 hours per week.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And then how much PT?
I mean, it depends on your kid. Like, where are your areas of concern? Yeah, it depends. Financially, what can you afford? What is your insurance covering? Where are your areas of concern? You know, sometimes, you know, ABA therapists and, you know, we work very closely with OTs and PTs in speech. It has to be a comprehensive treatment. We all have to be on the same plan. So even if you're getting, you know, more ABA than PT or speech, we actually should be all talking to each other and providing a comprehensive treatment plan where we're actually taking, you know, targets from OT and using it in our programming, targets from speech and PT, and incorporating it.
I give everybody my OT. The OT report, I give it to the ABA people.
Right.
And the ABA report, I give to the OT people. When I have a meeting, I say, I want everybody there. I want ABA, OT, speech, the school district, everybody should be, we should all be on the same page.
Right. And if we're looking, like, you know, for example, you know, fine motor programs, where we're actually building hand strength in the hand. That's an aspect that an OT could be working on. And we actually, as an ABA therapist, in our session, we have a fine motor program. But if there's something that we don't know, then an OT knows, you know, the developmental muscle tone, you know, extension muscles, contraction muscles, you know, if it's weaker in the hand and it's something that we need to build up, we're not going to be able to be very successful in our fine motor programs until we start building up those muscles. So, you know, this is, you know, we all have to be communicating, all practitioners across the board.
In the case where a child receives multiple therapies, and say speech, my son is verbal,
Right.
but has issues with like pragmatic, receptive language.
Right.
So is that something that ABA, because sometimes I feel like with the speech therapists, I don't know, they just don't get it. So I kind of feel like they reach a barrier at some point with like the social aspect of language.
Right.
And
that's unfortunate. Speech should really be incorporating the social pragmatic language that we use every single day. He's verbal, but he's not understanding the environmental cues of when to use language, is what I'm hearing.
Right, and he uses language, but sometimes, inappropriate. So I wondered whether ABA sometimes is used either to support it or sometimes, or at what point do you kind of do away with speech and just focus more on, the underlying causes?
Well, I'm never going to tell anyone to get rid of speech services, but, I may say you may need a different type of speech therapist that actually focuses on, that social thinking aspect of the speech. If your child can, if your child can emit sounds, has skill, word acquisitions, can learn words, has the appropriate muscle tone and muscle development in their larynx, their mouth, their diaphragm, then a speech therapist that focuses on those things is not the right fit for you. You're going to have to look for a speech therapist that builds on that social thinking aspect, and ABA actually works very closely in developing those social skills and when to use them. It's a behavior. So we're teaching a child about their environmental cues and when to use the language that they already have. You have any other questions? Yeah.
How do you distill a complex behavior into a simple behavior?
Like what kind of a complex
behavior? Like if it's a tantrum, for instance.
Pardon?
Like if it's a tantrum. For instance, you say the tantrum, or do you say kicking, screaming, like,
You're right.
response is not just, oh, frowny face. It's like,
right. So that's where we give an operational definition. If we're going to use a broad term like tantrum behavior, I'm actually going to even further define it. What the tantrum behavior looks for your particular child. Whining, screaming, without any kind of physical ailment. Is that what for, 5 seconds or more, or 10 seconds or more? We're always going to, we use those umbrella terms, tantrum, but we're always going to concisely define what is, because your tantrum behavior may not look the same as somebody else's tantrum behavior. And so, when someone is reading your report or a therapist comes in, and they're used to, arms flailing as part of a tantrum behavior with another client, but in your definition, arms flailing could be a stereotypy. It may not be part of a tantrum behavior. So, it's really important. This is the individualized component of every good therapist needs, or every good consultant needs to be individually defining every single thing for you. The behaviors, the skills that we're teaching, how it looks, how we're teaching it. Yes?
I think I understood your question exactly. The question is, with a complex seizure, you're going to treat it medically.
Oh, yes,
With
the
behavior,
seizure.
you're going to treat it.
Oh, was that you were talking about seizures? Or?
No, I was actually talking about responses. Like,
Okay.
like
All right. Yep.
sadness versus anger versus anxiety versus whatever presents differently as a response.
Yes.
But they might look like a tantrum in all cases, but in reality, the source of the tantrum
Right.
is completely different. So I'm just wondering like how you categorize that. But if you basically go into the minutia of, it's tears and he's turning his head and that sort of thing, and sort of
Right. And
that's
so that's where we're looking at the function of behavior. We're also looking at cultural differences. In some cultures, smiling means that you're feeling comfortable, calm, happy. In other cultures, smiling is a form of anxiety or nervousness. So, we are looking at these kind of different aspects, which is why it's so important that when we're talking about behaviors, we're not talking about happy or sad. Those change across the board to individuals. What I may think looks happy may not be what you think happy looks like, which is why we're always discussing just the behaviors and what it looks like. Yeah.
I think you should also mention, I don't know what your company does, but ours, we have a binder at home.
Yes.
And it stays in our house. The ABA therapist writes notes and graphs. I have no idea what the graphs mean, but if I want to know what the graphs mean, I can ask the therapist, what does it mean when the graph goes up and then the graph goes all the way down? And they'll explain that's I think what you mean when you're talking about.
So every home program has its own binder. I mean, some companies do folders, which is why I'm not kind of going into details of what it looks like. But yes, our company, we do binders.
And you can look at it anytime.
It's yours to keep. It's permanent record. We keep all of our data and graphs in there. And part of the caregiver training is actually, before we even start, we teach you what it all means. So you can, at the end of the night, you may not have time during that session to sit down with a therapist and say, can you explain this to me? Or you may not even be home. You may be working. But at the end of the night, when your children are in bed, you may have that time to look through. And that's why we think it's so important to give you that training so you can learn and see the progress on your own.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I can directly see the progress in my own mind.
Yeah, and it makes you feel like, we're moving in the right direction.
It's about 5 after 10, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop this for now. Can you stay around and answer
Yeah,
some
I will
questions?
definitely share